On today's World Insights, cultural heritage protection amidst a worldwide pandemic. Today, we look at how China is preserving the sights and sounds of its past.
The challenges of keeping culture going have never been as hard as they are now.
You know, there's that much wealth, artistic wealth and human creativity here. It just doesn't, there's no other place like it on the planet.
I like the idea of a medium that can communicate quite directly on an emotional level, and that's why I started exploring the sounds like almost like a part of history.
Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. Today we'll bring you a special program on China's culture and preservation efforts. UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, is in the front line of cultural heritage preservation. China now has 55 UNESCO World Heritage Sites, earning the top ranking, tied with Italy. Earlier, I talked to Dr. Marielza Oliveira, the director of the UNESCO Beijing Office, who's an outspoken guardian of cultural heritage protection. We discussed the challenges facing cultural exchanges amid the pandemic. I know you are working very hard in China, but the challenge of COVID-19 is for everyone in the world. So the protection, preservation of cultural heritage sites, museums, public and national parks, extremely challenging right now.
Indeed. You know, it's one of the biggest challenges we have. In terms of education, at some point 1.5 billion students, and in culture, almost everyone. All the artists, craftspeople, creative artists, you know, they have had a hit in their livelihoods. So it's a big challenge right now. Close to 90% of the museums of the world had to close, you know, and to stop receiving visitors simply because of social distancing and lockdown protocols and to avoid infection. Which means that, you know, the challenges of keeping culture going have never been as hard as they are now. First, we need to think about how to ensure that we can actually reopen these cultural venues safely and restart the festivals, exhibitions, and all the other magnificent ways in which we share our culture in a safe way that, that does not create potential clusters of transmission, for example. But we also have to think of how culture can continue going during lockdown periods. You know, it's not the case here in China anymore, but it's still the same in many places, including my own home country, Brazil, that we keep, you know, considering how culture can help people, how we can help culture continue to go on, and at a time that it's been so difficult. So what UNESCO has done in that regard, you know, first we held a global meeting of cultural ministers. China was a strong participant and sent a very positive message, you know, highlighting the importance of culture as a means for resilience for people and showing how culture itself is very resilient. It keeps going, but we had to actually move culture mostly online. So we have fantastic events around the world going on. We had this big debate in China. We had the Resiliart debate with people from all different walks of cultural life, with dancers, with musicians, with film, and so on.
Beautifully said. I think recently we've seen some theaters in China reopened and performances being put on stage. The dancers were galloping almost on the stage. Just think about the happiness of being able to dance again in front of the audience they admire. So these are all exciting news. But the underlining more philosophical thinking about how digital world can coexist with the physical world? And what would that mean in terms of challenge, though, of cultural interactions?
You know, China has a marvelous, marvelous troupe of dance dancers.
Yes.
You know, and one of the most beautiful, you know, capable dance troupe that I've ever seen. One of the things that they were saying to us is that on top of the difficulties that they have of face masks, they can't really read, you know, instruction and hidden behind a, you know, face mask like that. So the challenges are so many. But the thing is, culture is also very adaptive and very flexible, most creative endeavors that humanity has, and they are finding ways of interacting with the public, even if it's through an online screen. And technology is helping quite a lot. For example, museums, many museums, and in China, an incredible number of them have started online tours, you know, with 3D and virtual reality and all the different aspects that allow you to kind of immerse yourself in the beauty that surrounds you through an exhibition in a museum and so on. So that's one of the ways, you know, keep culture going using technology to give you the feeling of being there.
The other thing I really want to ask you is about the protection of cultural heritage sites. Earlier, there were concerns whether there are enough protections of cultural heritage sites, whether the mindset is right, and whether there's enough knowledge of and determination to research and investigate. But now you see the public awareness of that is ever increasing, almost skyrocketing in a way, encouraging and rallying the government's efforts to work on that area. How do you see this change in a way that's really just taking place over the past few years?
I love this. This is so heartwarming, you know, to see the public cherishing their heritage and jumping in, you know, to do what they can in order to protect it. And it's, you know, it's so beautiful to see that. I'm very, very pleased that we could be here to see that happen in China. You know, you mentioned the 40 years of the UN in China. UNESCO has been here for 35 years, and the first year was the first year in which China actually had a few heritage sites designated. Now, after 35 years, it has the largest number of heritage sites in the world. But not just heritage sites, traditions and practices as well. There's a renewed interest in young people to learn about their traditions and to seek to actually practice some of those. And of course, we are going to do and continue to raising awareness of the public, because an interest in conservation and safeguarding doesn't mean a knowledge of how, you know, and you know, so it's really important that we actually take this incredible motivation, this beautiful willingness to support, and transform it into an informed willingness to support, in order for them to actually, for the general public to actually be able to do that.
Celebrations are taking place around China. I'm sure you're talking to many of them. For example, the Forbidden City and 600 years anniversary. 270 years of the Summer Palace here in Beijing. They're all celebrating in big ways, and they're just trying so hard to find out the roots of culture and how it has been serving as a bridge between China and the rest of the world. How do you see a combination of both searching for the root and searching for inspiration as to how China functioned in history in terms of interacting with the rest of the world at a time, interestingly, of uncertainty when it comes to politics?
You know, heritage sites belong to humanity. So in a way, they are the property, the collective property of all of us. One of the most beautiful exhibitions I've ever seen in the Palace Museum was of gifts from foreigners that were given to the Emperor of China and that were exhibited alongside some of the beautiful pottery and artifacts that China itself has produced. And you know, it's a fantastic thing because you know, it was a fantastic exhibition because first it was a demonstration of very positive interactions that have taken place in the past, you know, of signs of friendship between cultures, between civilizations, that culture itself materialized, you know. The other thing was to see, you know, how these artifacts, the Chinese artifacts and the foreign artifacts, sometimes were very similar in terms of the techniques used and so on, showing that previous exchanges had taken place. But you see already that over thousands of years there had been exchanges that benefited both sides. And that exchanges benefiting both sides is exactly what we need right now. You know, what they, you know, in China you call mutual benefits, win-win cooperation and so on, because the kinds of challenges we have nowadays, they require that very positive spirit, that willingness to engage in a way that benefits everyone, you know, and having these kinds of signs in heritage sites that belong to humanity gives us, you know, a feeling that what we had before, friendly exchanges that were positive to all sides, we can have again. We have the capacity to hold those.
You come to China at a critical time, shall I put it that way?
Oh, yes, I'm very lucky.
It's also an uncertain time in terms of how China works with the rest of the world and how some of the other key players in the world look at international platforms such as the United Nations. From your perspective, working in cultural exchanges, education, and science fields in China and beyond in your early posts, how do you see our generation, literally speaking, will be able to provide a good answer to history?
Because we never had all of those piled up in one generation, in one group of people at the same time. You know, so it's literally, you know, it's tearing apart, you know, the fabric of our societies. And we need to find ways in which we communicate better, and that we are able to explain our viewpoints to each other and you know, debate how we can agree, you know, to what is the pathway forward, because, you know, and how we are going to divide the labor, you know, the tasks of moving forward. What is the part that actually touches us, you know, and how can we contribute to such an effort? One of the things that I find fascinating in China is how you have, you know, the central government setting goals, and then, you know, how it's decentralized, you know, in terms of small goals, you know, for different municipalities and, you know, and provinces and so on. What part should you be contributing to this national goal? Well, multilateralism is essentially the same. You know, it's us setting goals together, you know, globally, and then saying, how can we do our part? And we have a set of goals. It's called the Sustainable Development Goals. And we had agreed on those collectively. And of course, you know, nationally, we need to actually pursue, you know, the accomplishment of those goals together, you know, because they are not only contributing to global goals, but they are also bettering the lives in our own nations and communities, you know. So this is what I hope, you know, that we will do to answer history, do our part in a multilateral environment.
You're watching World Insight. Still to come on the program, a mix of ancient art and modern aesthetics. China's Dunhuang, famous for Buddhist cave paintings, stands out as a time-worn melting pot of cultures. A resident scholar tells us why after the break. welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. For merchants and artists traveling along the legendary Silk Road, the city of Dunhuang in northwestern China's Gansu province is a significant crossroad. These travelers left incredible marks with traditions, temples, and Buddhist art, making it one of China's most culturally rich travel destinations. The Mogao Caves, just outside the city, mainly built during the Tang dynasty and the following dynasties, are an eye-popping treasure trove of Buddhist art. To know more about this culture, I talked to Neil Schmid, the scholar in residence at the Dunhuang Academy, who specializes on the Silk Road and Buddhist studies. He shared deep insights into the Mogao Caves and surrounding areas of Dunhuang and how the arts and cultures have changed throughout China's history. Take a look. And I'm joined by Neil Schmid, the scholar in residence at the Dunhuang Academy. Neil, finally, good to see you.
Likewise, great seeing you as well.
You are
Welcome
sitting
to
in a
Dunhuang.
dazzling place. Tell me more about it. Where are you?
Okay, well, so I'm sitting in front of the Mogao Caves here in a very, very small oasis about 25 kilometers outside of the larger oasis of Dunhuang. And you can see behind me, these are the Sanwei Mountains.
Wow.
And on the other side, in front of me, are the Mogao Caves.
You know, what was your first Dunhuang moment, in a way? What about that has led you to be where you are today at the Dunhuang Academy?
Well, that moment happened more than 3 decades ago when I was a student and I had read a book by a University of Pennsylvania professor. And he had translated some narratives that come from Mogao, from the library cave, which we can talk more about. And these are Tang dynasty narratives. They're semi-vernacular. And they were so rich, and also his notes, you know, they were so erudite and scholarly, and there was so much information. I thought, I have to find out more about this place. You know, and that was the initial moment, you know, reading some literature that got me interested.
What kind of literature? And what did you read?
Well,
what kinds of questions were you in your mind and when you started this moment?
Well, so these are Buddhist stories about karma and rebirth. What was fascinating to me is that it was a world that was so different from mine, right? A world, and also a world in some ways seemingly in the middle of nowhere, and yet, you know, this isolated, really remote place, this frontier town of Dunhuang, produced this incredible literature. And at that point, I didn't even know about the art, right? So that was the moment when I said, okay, well, I have to go to Dunhuang. I have to visit.
How high exactly is the standard of aesthetics, of arts, of culture that's reflected in the caves and also the materials that you said discovered in the year 1900? We understand it's a wide range of subjects that Dunhuang, you know, embraced over the hundreds of years. So tell me more about your judgment.
Well, I think, quite honestly, I think there's no other place like it on the planet. I mean, you know, and that's just not my bias. I mean, I think it's true in terms of the sheer volume of human creativity that we find in these caves. I mean, they span roughly a 1,000-year period. They contain all different types of iconography and style. You know, of course, multicultural in so many ways. And there are 492 painted caves, and there are 735 caves altogether in this you know, kilometer plus long cliff face here. And yet, if you could think of 100 Sistine chapels, right? You know, there's that much wealth, artistic wealth, and human creativity here. It just doesn't. There's no other place like it on the planet. That's my firm conviction.
It's beyond words, I could tell while you're explaining.
It is. Absolutely. No, it's quite remarkable, just the range of materials and also cross-cultural materials that the caves contain, and the sheer artistry. If we think here we are in a frontier town on the edge of civilization, so to speak, what was going on in the Tang dynasty during this period, right? If we're here, you know, 1,000, 2,000 kilometers away from Chang'an or Luoyang, imagine the quality of art that existed there.
Now we all know, it's widely believed that Tang dynasty is one of those very opened up dynasty of Chinese history. Tell me more about what you have discovered together with other experts about that part of Dunhuang.
Well, I think what's interesting is that it's very, very clear that Dunhuang at that time was a composite society of many, many different cultures. And of course, that was true in Luoyang and Chang'an as well during the period. But here, of course, we have so much material that remains from that time. And you really see this cross-pollination. I mean, we have, even earlier, we have caves that have, you know, of course, Chinese deities, but also Taoist deities and Buddhist deities, Hindu gods, even Greek influences. And what's remarkable is that it's all in a single space, and it's not conflictual, right? That there's this kind of porousness of cultures. But I think also, especially during the Tang Dynasty, there was such a sense of confidence in China, in the Tang, that people could accept these influences and really play with them. There's this kind of ludic element to the caves and the ability to mix and match. And then something out of that, very, very creative, comes that is unique in its own.
What cave, which mural, what Buddha can give you that sense? If we got an opportunity once again to go to Dunhuang, what are some of the places we must go and visit?
I would recommend a cave like 285, which is actually earlier than the Tang, or cave 249, which have, you know, these remarkable murals on the ceilings with, you know, the wind god and the thunder god, and which are very Chinese gods in this case, Queen Mother of the West and King Father of the East, you know, but also Buddhist deities, Asura, for example, you know, of course, the Buddha himself. And all these are in a single space, you know, and we have to remember that these caves are like portals, you know, portals to another world, portals to salvation in some senses. And so they're very ecumenical in that sense, extremely cosmopolitan, extremely sophisticated.
Tell me more about how will this, you know, really fresh and also vivid depiction of the mindset of the stories of the real life of that time inspire you about what to do to research about culture?
I think one of the things that is truly remarkable about this site is that we have textual materials and visual materials, material culture, right? Of course, these spaces that you can actually go in and feel and experience what people felt and experienced in say, for example, the Tang Dynasty. You know, and in these caves, they're multi-sensorial, right? We have, of course, vision, but we have images of thousands of musical instruments, right? We have fabrics that they're painted, right? But they mimic fabric, so there's something tactile there. You know, senses such as smell. We have images of incense burning. So you really get an idea of the richness of these people's lives in ways that is extremely rare in any other circumstance. And, you know, the caves together with the texts themselves are much like an ethnographic collection. So again, we can enter into the details of people's lives, daily lives.
There's just so much there that needs to be studied. What do you think inspirations our generation can draw from, you know, the enormous amount of research about Dunhuang? As a researcher, what have you learned as inspiration?
It's a place that is inspirational, I think, number one, just because of the sheer depth of human creativity, but also because it's not, as I mentioned before, you go into these caves, they're multicultural, you know, in so many ways, and they're not conflictual, right? There really is this harmonious balance in so many ways of different cultures, of different art forms that come together in these unique spaces here. And I think there's something to be learned from that. There's, as I mentioned before, the Tang Dynasty was an incredibly self-confident period in Chinese history. And so that confidence, you know, it allows people to be open, right? They're not fearful. You know, there's a porousness and an ability to accept. You know, and one of the things that I think we forget is that a lot of the people who traveled along the Silk Road were refugees, you know, fleeing from places of conflict, you know, and they would come here, you know, which, you know, at times is extremely peaceful for hundreds of years, and were able to share their skills.
Tell me, how do you see, you know, the world history. Some say it will be progressing, but others suggest there will be always big ups and downs.
You know, that we can't assume progress will always be there, right? I think it's something that we need to, in some ways, fight for. You know, we need to be very, very aware that things can go the wrong direction, and we need to be hypervigilant. This is something I feel very, very strongly about, and that hypervigilance also includes being able to share our culture, right? Being able to help each other understand each other's culture, and like we just cannot take progress as a given.
Finally, before we go, Neil, Dunhuang Grottoes, together with Dunhuang Academy, have been doing enormous amount of work for the preservation and protection of Dunhuang. But we know, with, you know, it's just the way it is that cultural heritage sites, they erode and disappear.
Yes.
So what's the best way, from your perspective, to protect it?
Again, and that's an excellent question, because you know, here, I mean, the Academy, the Dunhuang Academy has been, I mean, they've done Herculean efforts to save this place. And they've worked also with the Getty Conservation Institute in the United States, in Los Angeles. And it takes a lot of planning. There are conflicting forces in some ways, because, of course, you know, tourist development is always putting pressure on heritage sites. And so to find ways to manage that and not deny people the experience, right? This is crucial. To allow people to come, but maintain the integrity of the caves. And there are threats. You know, everything from humidity that people bring into the caves, and bacteria, to wind. Also earthquakes. You know, we're on a major fault line here, and all it would take is one major earthquake to destroy the entire site. This is certainly possible. So the solution, or a partial solution to this, would be is what we're doing now, is digitizing the caves, and making them available to people around the world. There's a site called e-dunhuang.com where you can visit 30 caves and digitally tour them, you know, virtually tour them. And the next step is to do something called high volumetric VR, which provides an immersive experience for people. But digitization is absolutely crucial. You know, we've been making a lot of progress on it, but there's a lot of caves to go yet. But it's moving forward very, very quickly. And again, it's crucial to be able to share this site with people around the world if they can't come.
You're watching World Insight. Still to come on the program. Shoot for the ear and aim for the heart. The mission of a Chinese-British artist who keeps the sounds of traditional city life alive in his museum. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Next, we follow an artist to take a closer look at his unique collections. Colin Siyuan is a British artist as well as a curator. Though born in Britain, he has deep connections with China. He spent college years studying Chinese culture, and he returned to Beijing, where his mother was born and raised, embarking on a sound project back in the year 2013. Street hawkers calling out their wares, chirping cicadas and pigeon whistles. The loud sounds of traditional Beijing life can still be heard in Colin's museum. Before we began our conversation with him, we did listen to neighborhood noises that have completely disappeared in the city.
So this was my first foray into sound, my first project. And what it does is it really explores one particular aspect of Beijing culture, and that is the commercial sounds, the sounds of selling things in old Beijing before 1949. So you can hear recreation of an ambience according to season, or hear individual sounds.
Right.
So
let's go with the individual sounds.
Let's first listen to the only sound that we can still hear in Beijing today.
Okay.
It's called the Zheng Jing Gui. When you hear it, you'll know what I mean. Right. So you know what this is, right?
So the one who is sharpening the knives and everything, huh?
Yeah, that's right, that's right. So there's several metal plates placed together, strung together, and when you wave it like this, then it's like fish scales.
They clap one
They clap, yeah. Another one very important sound that's no longer extant now, but was extremely important, is this.
Beautiful sound.
Yes.
I've never heard it.
This twanging thing is called a huantou. And what it was is the barber.
Oh, I see.
The barber.
Calling out everybody to come out and have the haircut.
Now, this sound still existed about 15 years ago, but now it's completely disappeared. But it was really important in Qing Dynasty because in those days, men all had to have
that's right.
the front of the head shaved.
Exactly.
So this started off as a military, order, an edict from the emperor. When you heard that sound, every man had to come out and have his hair shaved at the front, right? With no exception, it was the law. And then eventually it just became the sound of the barber.
I see.
Yeah. So do you want to hear some singing sounds, hawking sounds? Yeah, okay. So
your favorite one, maybe.
Okay, tell me.
Okay.
So let me see. They sell all kinds of funny things.
Oh, all the snacks, right?
Yeah, this is a midnight snack.
Midnight snack.
Midnight snack.
I hate those ones because they usually make me fat. But anyway, go ahead.
There has to be a rhythm to it that people recognize.
Right.
And then, so they know what's slack.
Yes. So they're like living in their own courtyards, right? They're not walking out, but they can hear these sounds from the hutong, and then they can judge whether they come out to get the bowl or not. Oh,
exactly.
That's nice. Colin has a unique approach to appreciating the city of Beijing. Kickstarting the project in 2013, Colin worked to record the sounds of traditional city life before they disappear altogether. But it has never been an easy task. In our conversation, he explained how hard it is to capture the most vivid sounds. How many sounds have you collected from Old Beijing?
I haven't counted really, but I think it must be over 100, somewhere around that. So really, it's in its early stages. So I've collected not that many sounds, but there's a lot more to do. So I'm really just at the beginning of the process.
Among all the sounds, what are the sounds that you like the most?
I think it's the sound that's probably my favorite sound memory of Old Beijing, or not Old Beijing, but Beijing of my, when I was younger, pigeon whistles. The way that Beijing people keep pets is not the same as like in the West, you know, have dogs and cats and things like that. Beijingers, they like a different kind of other way of relating to pets, and sound is one of the most important things for them. You know, songbirds and insects that chirp, and pigeon whistles. Well, I mean, people all around the world, there are pigeon fanciers,
yes,
right, all around the world, and they, you know, they raise pigeons, they breed very beautiful varieties of pigeons. Then in Beijing, they make pigeons sing using whistles. What they do is that they attach whistles on their tail feathers, so that when they fly in the air, the wind from their flight creates the whistle.
The chorus of sounds.
And the whistles themselves are very complex. They're not just a simple whistle. One whistle might have as many as 15 or even 20 smaller whistles attached. So when you have several pigeons flying in the air, there are deeper sounds, there are higher sounds, and it creates a kind of very complex sound. I made one good recording, but it still wasn't perfect because the season wasn't quite right.
What has to be the season?
Winter is the best season. The pigeons, they can fly a long time without getting tired. Summer is impossible because they're actually changing feathers. So, you know, if you attach the whistle to their tail feathers, they might just fall off.
This is really a comprehensive project. You have to know all the subjects in order to put them together.
And anyway, they're too hot. They can't be bothered flying.
Yeah.
So the best season is winter. And I did this in spring, where it was getting warmer. So they flew for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and they couldn't be bothered, and they went back into their coops. So so I have to try again this year.
So you have to court the pigeons all the time.
Yeah, I have to court different people, different pigeons all the time to get the right recording.
It's not just the sounds, but the things related to the sounds, the people we've met, the ambience, the taste, the smell, the everything. what are they to you?
I like the idea of a medium that can communicate quite directly on an emotional level. And that's why I started exploring the sounds almost like a part of history. And I also get a lot of people who come up to me and they hope that I can record sounds that haven't been recorded before.
Or dear to their hearts, right?
Yeah, dear to them, yeah, exactly. And that's why the next phase of my project, I want society to participate in what my project is called Sound Terminus.
And the public can contribute.
Exactly.
Colin's deep connection to China comes not only from his studies of Chinese culture, but more importantly, from his roots. He told me some very interesting stories about his family. Family history.
That's right, yeah. So I guess we should start with my great-grandfather. It's my maternal grandmother's father, Lin Pupeng. So we can see the difference of his attire when he was a government official in the Qing dynasty. After the revolution, in the Republican era, he was a government minister, and then eventually turned into a very different kind of looking man. And here's a kind of cute photograph of my mother.
So this is already the courtyard, right?
This is already this courtyard.
Yeah.
And when it used to be a garden, and my mother riding a donkey and looking very happy.
So the grandma, grandpa, of course.
That's right. This is already in the 50s when they're living in London, and this is somewhere in Europe, I don't know where.
Yeah.
And here we have a photograph which is interesting. This is the last days of my grandmother's life. When she was wheeled into this courtyard, which didn't look anything like the courtyard that she grew up in. It was already it was a nursery school. We saw these kids. Right. Most of the buildings were already not there anymore. But as soon as she came into this courtyard, she said, "My mother's calling me for dinner."
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So she just knew, her childhood memory came back to her. She knew she was home, and she had a memory of her mother calling her for dinner.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And this is the courtyard we just have been, is the one that hosted so many people.
That's right, yeah. Back in my great-grandfather's days, these famous people like Qi Baishi and Chen Shizang and yeah. All these people who were...
biggest names of our time.
Yeah. They were frequent visitors.
So how do you see your own identity vis-a-vis their generations and what they created?
I don't see a direct creative lineage between my grandparents and myself. I think they lived in a completely different era, and I didn't grow up with them, so I don't have a direct, let's say, inspiration, relationship with their lives or them living with them. From a family perspective or an intellectual perspective. The other thing is that I'm not a big fan of attempting to bask in your, ancestors' glory.
Past glory, yeah.
Yeah. Although I can take pride in the fact that I come from this family.
Of course.
There's nothing wrong with that. And it's really nice to know that my grandparents made an impact on the intellectual life of their time.
Their generation being considered by many here today as quite significant, and certainly the lives of their generation as a whole can be described as turbulent, but certainly exciting in retrospect. How would you see our generation vis-a-vis theirs?
They went through the Second World War, they went through Civil War, they went through incredibly momentous periods of history. Right now we're at peace, at least we are. On the surface everything's calm, but at the same time you know that it's not, and what that means for you and how do you relate to that as a person. We all know that the politics of the world is becoming very polarized, so we know that something is happening. It's a whole complex issue of eras changing or merging or splitting apart. How that relates to you as a human being when you need to feel grounded in a creative practice or in a certain identity,
Yeah.
or what even identity means. That's the complexity of right now.
Should we think more these days about what we are experiencing and ourselves in the context, or should we continue to move on with the speed and the rhythm we used to have?
I'm only saying I can't talk about society at large because it's way too big for me, but I can talk about myself because I think I face exactly the same issues as the rest of society. It's like, what do I do to ensure that I survive professionally and do something that I feel that I can enjoy for a long, long time? Not just in the moment, just now, and then make a lot of money and then think about what to do next.
Let me just pull in, once again, your grandpa's generation. They face a lot of questions for the very first time. For example, whether to learn from the West, what to learn from the West, and where is their future, in their home country or outside. They certainly give their answers.
Yeah.
But a lot of these questions that they didn't have a definitive answer of their generation coming back to us again.
Well, one of the reasons why I think this generation, the generation now, finds the Republican era so interesting, and the writers of that generation, my grandparents' generation, so interesting, is that I feel that China has two traditions. One is Chinese traditional culture that goes all the way back to Confucius and the pre-Qin era philosophers and all that. The other tradition that I think is very, very closely related to modern China, who we are in China, is the Republican era. That is, in a way, that's where we come from. A lot of our thinking, a lot of our lifestyles, a lot of why we think the way we think. And we're facing the same problems. We're facing the same problems all over again. So it's not necessarily that anybody has a definitive solution. It's about thinking about it in inspired terms rather than in dogmatic terms.
And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, you can certainly search World Inside, the name of our program, or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. On behalf of the team, thanks so much for watching, and bye for now.